Robert Komatsu served as the editor as one of the editors on the FX limited series Mrs. America, which chronicles the battle to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment into the U.S. Constitution. And he recently scored his first Emmy nomination for his work on the series. I'm Charlie Bright of Gold Derby, and Robert joins us today. And my first question is, was there any difficulty in having to share episodes to edit? Because you did this with two other editors, and you each had 3 episodes. Was that a difficult thing to deal with, having other people edit other episodes?
No, hey Charlie, how you doing? Thanks for having me on. No, it was great because you have 2 partners that you can collaborate with. In fact, I have to sort of elaborate on one of them because we started at the same time. I started about 10 days early to work on some archival footage, and Emily Green started on day 1 of shooting because Anna and Ryan were block shooting episodes 1 and 2 simultaneously. And so we were both cutting simultaneously. I was doing 1 and she was doing 2. And, at the time, Anna and Ryan would send emails from one joint email account, and they would sign it like from Anna and Ryan or from Ryan and Anna. And Emily and I went to her and I said, like, hey, let's confer and let's write back with 1 email as well. Because I sort of figured like, oh yeah, you're like this directing team? Well, we're an editing team. And Emily said, yeah, and then we signed it Rob and Emily or Emily and Rob, and then eventually she started calling us Team Robily. But yeah, like we would confer all the time. I mean, like one example would be how we kind of came up with the titles for the show, like, when it would say like 1971 or whatever, or like 13 states have ratified the ERA. We were both looking at different fonts, and then we would compare. And I think we liked one that she had found the most. It was like, oh yeah, Emily, you found the right one. Like that's like the perfect font. And then we both tried it in our rooms. And I went to her, I said, did you cut it in? Oh yeah. And I said, did you make it kind of big by any chance? And she said, oh yeah, I made it pretty big. And I went in there, I was like, oh, well, let me show you what I did. And we went into my room, and mine like took up the whole frame. And she was like, whoa, that's big. She's like, I like it. And that's kind of like how we came up with the titles for the show. It was like this Robily collaboration. And then, we would show each other scenes all the time, because like episode 1 deals with mostly like the conservative side with Phyllis Schlafly. Episode 2 dealt mostly with the feminist side. And I was doing 1, and I would cut the conservative side a certain way based on how Anna and Ryan shot it. And Emily was cutting the feminist side a certain way on how they shot that, which is a very different visual style. And so when we would get we get the other side, I wanted to like, hey, like, how are you cutting the feminists? Or she'd say, how are you cutting the conservatives? And, we would totally collaborate from there on. About a month and a half later, Todd Downing joined us and just, continued the trend. So we would screen episodes for each other and comment on each other's work. There was a screening room actually right down the hall from us that was connected to our media, and it was never used. So we could just go in there and just like, log into our project and like screen episodes for each other really easily.
So one of the other things that's really interesting in how the first episode is put together, that's the one that you're nominated for, is you use this split screen sequence in that first episode that's really, really, really compelling. I'm curious as to how you came up with using the split screen in that.
The split screen was interesting because it wasn't scripted. And there's a section in the story where Phyllis goes through her Rolodex and she's mailing her newsletter out to like her network of housewives, and she's recruiting everyone to like stop the ERA. And about a week or so before shooting it, Ryan and Anna called me and said like, hey, like we're thinking of shooting this like a split screen. I was like, okay. I was a little surprised because I wasn't expecting that. And I said like, do you kind of know what style you want to go for? And they weren't sure. So what I did was I put together a few concepts I just sort of faked, and I sent it to them, and it started a conversation. And what we landed on was something that sort of evoked the 70s. So we're not talking like a sleek split screen sequence. We're talking kind of like chunky, I guess. So we'd have like different panels of different sizes, asymmetrically placed around the screen. We didn't mind if there were big chunks of black in between. It was also challenging because it wasn't completely shot even by the time I showed my editor's cut. It was scheduled to be shot over a series of months afterwards. So like, I think I had maybe like 3 or 4 women, different housewives, like getting the newsletter. I had like close-ups of typewriters typing names, and maybe like stacks of envelopes being ready to be mailed out. I didn't even have any Kate Blanchett shots yet. So I used what I had, or I would reuse what I had too, and like kind of fake it to look like other shots as placeholders. I think I used frozen frames from the Barry Goldwater scene of Kate Blanchett, and I was like, this represents Kate typing, or this represents Kate doing this, and we just kept going from there. And it was pretty gratifying because like the template I was making and that Anna and Ryan approved sort of influenced a little bit of how they shot it. I mean, for example, like they saw that I used 6 different typewriter panels in one shot, and they liked it. But Anna said like, well, I guess we're gonna have to shoot more typewriters now because you use so many of them. And we even got my wife's name in there. Anna did say to me like, okay, Phyllis Schlafly would never have the name Deborah Komatsu in her Rolodex. And she wouldn't even have her maiden name, Deborah Rosenberg. So like they ended up shooting Deborah and then K.O. and it's off frame, but like got my wife's name in the show. So that was kind of fun. But everyone loved the split screens, and it kind of became part of the style for the show as a whole. So that made me pretty happy about that.
And there was another aspect of this that really was interesting in how you incorporated archival footage into these episodes. And I was wondering if you could tell us a bit more about that as well.
Yeah, well, the archival also wasn't scripted, but the producers did have like the theme per episode. But it all came down to kind of like, what are you going to find? What are you going to get? And then like, where should we put it? Because like I said, it wasn't scripted. So, I started 10 days earlier than shooting. And we knew for the first episode, they wanted to focus a little bit on the ERA marches in Washington, and then also on the period of time right after Shirley Chisholm announced that she was going to run for president. So for the ERA marches, found a bunch of stuff, and I put together this montage, and I sort of thought it might be nice to have it right after Phyllis arrives in Washington to go see Phil Crane. So she steps out of the taxi, sees like a bunch of our extras as marchers, and then we cut to this archival footage, and then we cut back to Phyllis, and she walks into her meeting. And I put it to Magic Carpet Ride by Steppenwolf. And that was great. Eventually, we ended up losing that section, though, just because although it worked really well and integrated really nicely, and like it helped us feature the song even more. But like when you're watching the episode as a whole, we just sort of felt like, do we really need it? And like, is it even maybe just breaking up the momentum that we're building up a little bit? So we lost it there. And the other section was actually super smooth. It was the part where Shirley Chisholm announces her run for presidency. So obviously, whatever we find, we're going to put right there. And we got a bunch of different stuff. And I immediately sort of, what I liked the best of all this, hours and hours of footage, was this reporter asking people on the street, like, what do you think of a woman running for president? And then you would get all these varied responses. And it wasn't always like the response you would expect. Like you might see like this crusty old guy, and he's like, oh, he's going to hate it. He's like, it's about time we had a woman for president. Like, oh, and then it might be this woman that he's like, oh, she's going to be for it. She's like, I don't think they're as capable as men as president. And so like, it was really interesting and fun to cut them together and juxtapose their answers, or even like have one person start an answer and another person finish it. And that one was super smooth. I mean, it's like, it never changed position. And I think maybe we cut out 1 or 2 people just purely for time.
So other than the 2 aspects that I brought up, what were the most challenging parts for you to cut together from the 3 episodes that you served as the editor on?
For all of them? Well, I mean, it probably was the pilot. And it's because, we're all sort of figuring out the show together, since it's the very first one. And everyone's also scrutinizing it the most, in terms of like the studio as it's being shot. But it was probably the most challenging, and for a couple of reasons too. That we had like three very, very big dialogue scenes in there. And, one was pretty near the beginning. It was the show for that Phil Crane, it was Phil Crane's show, The Conservative Viewpoint that Phyllis was on. The next was the Barry Goldwater scene where she goes to his office for a meeting. And the last is what's known as the Daughters of the Revolution luncheon that she has, where she has all the housewives. Three huge, like monstrous dialogue scenes. In fact, Conservative Viewpoint and Goldwater were the very first two scenes that they shot. So like basically like I was thrown in the deep end. Actually everyone was thrown in the deep end right away. So like figuring those out, just kind of like the pacing and how much we wanted to use and maybe what could we lose to make it more efficient. And that was a pretty good challenge.
What was it challenging to edit together? Because I think one of the best scenes in the entire series is the debate between Phyllis and Betty Friedan.
In 4.
And
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in 4. And I was wondering what was that like to edit that scene together? Because in addition to the dialogue and everything else, the editing creates so much wonderful tension that of course builds up to Tracy Ullman's wonderful explosion towards Kate Blanchett, and I was wondering, how do you edit, convey that tension through editing?
Right. Well, first of all, that scene, I think I got 8 hours of dailies on that scene alone. So like I had like a ton of great material to work from. And I think like Amma, the director, and we really treated it like a tennis match or a boxing match, I guess. I think more like a boxing match. So it might be like, at the end of round 1, Tracy Ullman, Betty Friedan really scored a point, and that'd be the end of the round. And then what we did was these time dissolves to the next round, and maybe at that one, Phyllis Schlafly scored a point. So it was basically just kind of like, that's kind of like the structure. That's how we sort of cracked it in terms of like, that's going to be the structure of this debate. And then from there, it was just kind of like ramping up the tension and the pacing so that it would like lead to one of those people scoring a point. And then we could punctuate it, of course, by various audience reaction shots.
So you have actually, when you look at your filmography so far, you've edited things that go over all sorts of different genres. I mean, you've done Mrs. America, you've done dramatic stuff with I'm Dying Up Here, and more whatever you want to call the X-Files, as I can see from your poster behind you. I mean, you've worked all over different genres, and I was curious as to whether or not there's a genre that you find more challenging to do edits for than other genres.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't say I find one more challenging than the other. I think every genre has its own challenges. I will say that sometimes, like after I do one genre, you might be like, oh man, I want to do like a comedy stuff next. Then after that, I might be like, I wish I had more action next. And so like I do like bouncing back and forth between genres. Though I guess a lot of the stuff I do sort of like mixes genres. I mean, like the X-Files, it's like, ooh, creepy, spooky, but there was like a lot of humor in those episodes. And Halt and Catch Fire is a drama, but there was a lot of humor there too. Or I'm Dying Up Here, which was it was a drama about the world of stand-up comedy, so it was like a ton of comedy, but there's a lot of drama in that as well. So I don't really know. I think every genre has its own inherent challenges, and things aren't always as obvious. Like some people might say that action is the hardest, but it's not necessarily the hardest. I mean, everything has its own sets of challenges, and I actually kind of like them all. Like I wouldn't want to only do one, or I wouldn't want to avoid any of them.
So I mentioned that you scored that this Mrs. America scored you your first career Emmy nomination. You're nominated for the pilot episode of Phyllis. What was it like to find out that you had earned your first career Emmy nomination?
It was stunning. You know, I mean, I was at home, of course. Everyone, aren't we all? And you know, like I knew, you know, I knew it was that morning, but it's such a crowded field. You know, like who knows who's going to get nominated? And I remember you know, I was watching the Leslie Jones thing. I didn't really know that at the same time they put, I guess they released the information of all the categories that got nominated, and then all of a sudden I started getting like emails and texts and phone calls, and I was like, what's happening? And that's kind of how I found out. And so it was a very sort of crazy, exciting, fun morning.
Well, Robert, thank you so much for joining us. We wish you all the best at this during this upcoming Emmy season. And to all of our viewers, please make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel to get our latest content, and don't forget to go to goldderby.com and use the Gold Derby app to make your predictions and see if you can outsmart the top prognosticators in Hollywood. Thanks so much, Robert.
Thank you so much, Charlie, for having me.